Ever imagine, like, Japan, but no internet, no skyscrapers totally cut off from the world?
Sounds peaceful.
Maybe, but that's the Edo period we're talking about, over 250 years, from 1603 to 1868.
Wow, 250 years.
Yeah, and we're diving into a Wikipedia article about it today, and trust me, this isn't just like your typical boring history lesson.
Good.
Edo Japan had huge cities, super strict social rules, and an art scene that's still influencing stuff today. It's crazy.
It really is. It's funny how often people just dismiss the Edo period as like totally backward,
Yeah, right.
when in reality it set the stage for so much of what we think of as modern Japan.
Okay, so let's like set the scene. We have to talk about the Tokugawa Shogunate. How did they even come to power? What did they do to keep it going for so long?
Well, picture this. Japan's been in this brutal civil war for like a whole century.
Oh, wow.
Then, in 1600, Tokugawa Ieyasu wins this huge battle at Sekigahara and becomes shogun. And that's it. 250 years of peace and stability begin.
Just like that.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
But, holding on to that power, that's where things get really interesting. They created this system called bakuhan.
Bakuhan.
Yeah, it was this delicate balancing act between the shogun and the regional lords, the daimyo.
Oh, okay, so like a feudal system, kind of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The shogun had the national power, but the daimyo ruled their own regions, their own little kingdoms almost.
Okay.
But here's the catch. The shogunate also came up with a system called Senkin Kotai. Imagine being forced to relocate like every other year.
What? Seriously?
Yeah, the daimyo had to live in Edo every other year, and their families had to stay there permanently.
Hold on, so they were basically hostages.
Pretty much. It was a way to ensure their loyalty, to keep them in check.
That's intense.
Imagine the logistics of that, moving entire households back and forth across Japan.
That's wild. I mean, did that affect anything?
Oh, for sure. This constant movement must have had a huge impact on Edo society and definitely on the economy.
I can imagine. And then on top of all that, they decide to just cut themselves off from everyone else, like the whole world.
Yeah, that's the Sakoku Policy, started in 1639.
Yeah.
Except for some limited trade with the Dutch.
The Dutch.
Yeah, on this tiny man-made island called Dejima.
Okay.
Besides that, Japan basically closed its doors to the entire world.
So they were isolated, but I thought you said they saw economic growth. How does that even happen?
That's one of the most fascinating parts of Edo Japan, honestly. Despite this crazy isolation, they had significant economic growth, huge cities, and they even figured out some Western science and technology.
Wait, how? I thought they were isolated.
They weren't totally cut off. They had Rangaku,
Rangaku.
Dutch studies.
Okay.
It became this secret way to learn about the West.
Okay, so how did that work? Dutch studies.
So basically, through their little bit of contact with the Dutch, Japanese scholars were able to study Western medicine, astronomy, shipbuilding, even how to build those super complex clocks they had in Europe.
Oh, wow. So it was like a secret window to the West.
Ex
Huh. It makes you wonder, like, what if they hadn't isolated themselves? Could they have, like, advanced even faster?
It's a good question. But we can't forget that even before the isolation, Japan wasn't totally in the dark. Remember that Japanese embassy that went to Europe?
Yeah. Totally forgot about that. That was before they shut themselves off, right?
Decades before. They sailed all the way there on a galleon.
That's wild. So they weren't totally opposed to contact with the outside. But then, boom, closed doors for centuries.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we've got this picture, isolation, economic growth, a little bit of Western knowledge coming in. But what was life really like for the average person? We always hear about samurai, but I feel like there's more to it than that.
Oh, definitely. The social structure wasn't just samurai at the top and everyone else below.
Yeah.
The emperor was at the very top, then the shogun and daimyo, and then the samurai. But it wasn't that straightforward.
So not just the simple samurai, farmer, artisan, merchant thing.
No way.
Yeah.
Farmers, artisans, and merchants, those were all considered equal in the Confucian system. Just different roles,
Oh, okay.
And then you have the chonin, the city merchants. They're the ones who really start to gain power during this time.
Interesting. So while the samurai are dealing with debt and holding on to their warrior status,
The merchants are getting rich, funding the arts, even marrying into samurai families.
wow, talk about a shift in power. And I guess that's all tied to this economic boom we talked about, right? Peace leads to prosperity, and now you have this whole new class of rich merchants who are changing Japan.
Exactly. And that's where things get even more interesting.
So it's like this clash between the old ways and this new energy, right? You've got the samurai with their traditions and then these merchants with new ideas and a ton of money. I bet that caused some, like, friction.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it all plays out in really interesting ways, especially when we look at Edo culture. Have you ever heard of Ukiyo?
Ukiyo.
Yeah, the floating world.
I think so, but I don't really know what it means. Like, I get the feeling it's about pleasure and beauty, but that's about it.
It's more than just a feeling, though. It was like this whole aesthetic, a way of life that became huge during the Edo period.
Okay.
It was all about enjoying the moment, finding beauty in everyday things, indulging in fashion art entertainment.
Sounds fun.
It was. Think
Yeah.
Geisha, Kabuki theater, sumo wrestling, all part of the Ukiyo world.
So it was like a reaction to all the strict rules, like people saying, hey, we can still have fun.
Exactly. And the rising merchant class was a big part of it. They had the money and the time to support the arts and all these pleasures. And the art that came out of this period is incredible. Think Ukiyo-e.
Oh, the yoi.
Those woodblock prints, the ones with the bold colors and all the detail.
Yeah, like that famous one, The Great Wave off Kanagawa. Those are amazing. How did they even make those without any technology?
I know. The skill is insane. And what's so cool is that Ukiyo-e didn't just capture Edo culture. It also influenced Western art.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Artists like Monet and Van Gogh were super into these prints. They took a lot of inspiration from them.
Wow. So Edo's aesthetic went global.
It did. And you can still see it today, from fashion to film.
Oh, yeah.
Think of Akira Kurosawa's films, the way he uses light and shadow, or the look of anime and manga,
Yeah.
all rooted in Edo aesthetics.
It makes you realize how important this period was. But even with all this cool stuff happening, it sounds like the Edo period wasn't perfect.
You're right. As we get into the later Edo period, you start to see some problems,
Yeah.
economic troubles, peasants revolting, and then there's this threat from the West.
Right. They can't just stay isolated forever. The world's changing, and Japan is stuck with this system that's getting kind of old.
Exactly. And then, bam, in 1853, Commodore Perry and his black ships show up.
Black ships.
Yeah, they were American warships.
Oh, okay.
And they basically forced Japan to open up to trade.
Whoa. Talk about a wake-up call. What did the Shogunate do? Did they try to fight back?
They did try to modernize, but it was too late. They tried to make their military better, even brought in French engineers to help with their navy. They sent students abroad to study Western tech and started translating Western books like crazy.
So they tried.
But the political scene was shifting. People were getting fed up with the shogunate, and they wanted the emperor back in charge.
Oh, man. So much tension. Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was all this internal pressure, plus the threat from the West. The shogunate was in trouble.
Yeah, I could see that.
They just couldn't hold on. And in 1867, the last shogun resigned. That paved the way for the Meiji Restoration.
So a system that lasted for over 250 years just disappears like that.
It's crazy, right? It shows how powerful those internal and external forces can be.
For sure. And even though the Edo period ended, it feels like its impact is still here today.
It is, and that's what's so cool about studying this period. It wasn't just samurai and geisha.
Yeah.
It was full of contradictions. Isolation and innovation, strict rules and shifting power, peace, and then things that led to its end.
It's like a tiny version of all of human history happening in Japan.
That's a good way to put it. And it makes
Okay.
you think, what can we learn from the Edo period? What can we take from their successes and their mistakes? Especially now with the world changing so fast.
Yeah. It's easy to think the past doesn't matter, but the more we look at it, the more we see how it connects to us today. Like take that Senkin Kotai system, that forced relocation thing.
Right.
Could something like that happen now? Maybe not in the exact same way, but I bet governments and even companies try to control where people go and what they do.
That's an interesting thought. And the economic problems they had in the late Edo period are similar to what we're dealing with now.
How so?
Think about it. Income inequality, not enough resources, political instability. These things keep happening over and over.
So what does it all mean? What should someone listening to this take away from it?
I think the Edo period is this amazing way to look at our own world. It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and wars. It's about understanding the things that shape our lives, the choices we make, and how those choices affect the future. And maybe if we study the past, we can learn how to handle the present and the future better.
That's a great point. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive.
Of course.
I learned a lot, and I hope our listener did too. It's crazy how just one period in Japanese history has so many lessons and contradictions, but honestly, when I think about the Edo period, the art is what really sticks with me, that ukiyo-e style. It's so different and cool.
It is really striking how that look still feels fresh, even now. And it's not even just the visual art. Think about all the literature from the Edo period.
Oh, yeah.
They had this amazing tradition of poetry and writing and plays. You have these iconic works like The Life of an Amorous Man by Sakoku.
Okay.
Gives this incredibly detailed, almost anthropological look at urban life in Edo.
I'm starting to see that the Edo period was like this explosion of creativity, like a golden age for Japanese arts and
It
culture.
really was. So much art was made. And it reminds us that even when things are tough socially and politically, people are still creative.
It makes you wonder what creative stuff is happening right now that people will look back on and be like, that's so 21st century.
That's a really great question. And it takes us back to that idea of the Edo period being like a little version of human history. It shows us how societies change, how they deal with new ideas and challenges. And it leaves us with this question. What can we learn from Edo Japan, from their good and bad choices that could help us in our world today?
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the past, but the more we dig into it, the more we see how it connects to us. Like that Senkin Kotai system, the one where they forced people to move.
Right.
Could that ever happen now? Maybe not exactly like that, but I bet governments and even big companies try to control where we go and what we do in different ways.
That's a fascinating thought. And, the economic problems they had in the late Edo period, those are similar to stuff we deal with now.
Really?
Think about it. Income inequality, not enough resources, political instability. It's like these things just keep happening throughout history.
So what does it all mean? If someone's listening to this, what should they take away from it?
The Edo period gives us this amazing lens to look at our own world. It reminds us that history isn't just dates and wars. It's about understanding the things that shape our lives, the choices we make, and how those choices affect the future. And maybe, just maybe, by studying the past, we can learn something to help us deal with the present and the future better.
I think that's a good note to end on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. I feel like I learned so much, and I hope everyone listening did too.